Okay, so like I said before, I teach in this teeny tiny town called New York Mills, just outside of Utica. So if you're familiar with Dunder Mifflin in The Office, we're right outside of there. And I do have to say, this is the first nice day that we've had in a couple of days, and my neighbor just started up his lawnmower. So if it gets too loud, please tell me and I'll move to a different room. I was like, figures, that's gonna happen. So I was intrigued by red rocks a few years ago. One of my friends from high school works at Arizona State University with this program, and he reached out to me and talked to me about it. And I was intrigued by it because New York State, the chemistry curriculum tends to be in the redox unit very centered around batteries, and I've always liked rocks. Not so much the earth science aspect of rocks, but my mom has always said, like, when you're a Shermer, you like rocks. And it's true, I built a rock wall in my backyard. And there have been other times where I've thought, like, this is interesting. So I went to Quinnipiac University in Hampton, Connecticut, and across the street, Sleeping Giant State Park, there's some rock cliffs. And I very specifically remember the day being outside in my biology lab saying, oh, why are those rocks a different color? And my professor looked at me and he goes, oxidation, Audrey. Oxidation. And my mom's always liked The Old Man of the Mountain, and he fell apart. And I remember when I saw the pictures, I was so excited because I was like, oxidation, Mom, oxidation. And my house has a rock wall on the front and it's different colors because of the oxidation. And then I think of other things like the guacamole at Chipotle doesn't oxidize, it doesn't turn brown. And although obviously batteries are really useful for us, there's lots of all these other examples of oxidation that I think we overlook. So I wanted to give my kids a different perspective of it. And when Joe Tamer talked to me about it, I was like, yeah, we can do this. This sounds like a lot of fun. So this is how I've used it. So it's 3 years now that I've used it. In 2017-18, we used it in September because Joe came up to our area to have us use the virtual reality experience, and we did this, we collected some data for them. And I kind of used it as an introduction of scientific method and scientific processes. Like, what are scientists doing to study a place like Mars when you can't really do the good old scientific method exactly as it is? Like, what is really the scientific process to really just to give them a different perspective of how you can still conduct a scientific study. Last year, I used it as part of my redox unit, and I didn't change anything from what was on the Infiniscope website and the lesson materials, and that kind of made me think that I could make better connections to redox. And this year, my goal was to actually adapt the lesson and have them identify some half reactions and write some half reactions as they're going through the lessons. And I just never got that far because on March 13th, we were kicked out of school, and it's just been a whirlwind since then. I'm basically a second-year teacher. I've got the supplies, but I'm still like just dragging my feet getting everything done because it's also brand new. But what I really like to go with the whole unit or the whole experience is to incorporate some half reactions and going a little bit more in depth with that in it, so that way they get the connection a little bit stronger. So I just felt like everything that Diane said, I also related to. And I want to talk about some of the pros and the cons. One of the things, I don't have a lot of students that have disabilities in my class in chemistry, but I had a significantly visually impaired student 2 years ago, the first year that I did the experience, and I had no idea how it was going to work. And he was amazed by everything because the videos and the pictures were such good quality. He could see things that we didn't expect that he was actually going to be able to see. And he was truly intrigued by this. And actually his mother reported that he went home and he wanted to learn more about outer space because this was the first time that he could actually experience it. And it was awesome. But most students, are genuinely intrigued by space, and with the New York State curriculum in earth science, they get a little astronomy, but I don't think it's quite as in-depth as they want it to go. So this was a really good experience for them to learn more about how we even study space and what is the Mars rover actually doing. So it's not really a connection to oxidation there, but they really like that. And actually, some of my kids this year have asked if they can go to the Mars webinar in May and learn more about what we know about Mars as a result of this. I do love that the pace is determined by the individual, and I included this for this year. The median time is 1 hour and 9 minutes. And some of my students took well over 2 hours. And so while that is a pro, it's also a con, because I have 35-minute classes this year, or had. And so to complete it in school, it takes about 4 class periods, because they have to get in, they have to get their computers going, then they have to log in. And by the time we get to that point, they have about 25 to 28 minutes, because I'm a stickler on, you're gonna shut down the computer the right way before you leave my classroom, and not just close it and walk away because that you made a mess for everybody else. So it does take a long time in class, but it was really interesting for me to see this year how much time individuals were spending on it. One of the things that I've seen as a con with this experience is one of the purposes of this is for students to see the way rocks oxidize on Earth and compare that to how they oxidized on Mars, and to see that they did not form in the same way. And last year, my students could not make that connection. And I've thought a lot about that. And one of my goals this year was to make that connection better and stronger through the questions that I asked them to complete. I've thought a lot about that group. They are historically a weak group of test takers. And we have lots of data that supports that. So I don't know if it's just that group, or if there's a better way for me to ask the questions. I'm hoping it's the questions and the way that they're asked will make that a stronger connection. But I feel like it's also difficult for me to truly tell this year, since my kids are far from me. Because the images and all the videos are such good quality, they can be slow to load, and that will take you more time in the classroom. I have talked to a couple of kids this year about it, and I've only had one student complain about how slow it was, but she also laments that her internet at home is just slow all the time. But nobody said anything about that this year. So I think that's just a issue that I experience at my school, where our internet is not that fantastic. And also, like Diane said, you really have to work with your tech people. I spent about half of a day before I deployed this to my students, just texting with my tech guy, trying to figure out. I had one student that I knew was up at 9 a.m. and I kept asking him, did you get this email? Did you get this email? Did you get this email? And we had to block a whole bunch of different things, or unblock them, so that way they could just get the email from Smart Sparrow to them, so that way they can be enrolled in the lesson. So just work really closely with them. Make sure that you, on the lesson plan page, all those links are listed for YouTube and all the things that they're going to have to unblock. Give that to them well in advance so they can just take care of it. And that'll make your life a lot easier. So this year was interesting because I'm not with the kids, and I still wanted to use it because, again, I still think there's a really lot of cool oxidation things out there that just happen in front of us. We don't realize it at the time. So what I did was I combined a worksheet that I had used in the first year for the group to collect some data, so some before, during, and after questions. And so, for example, one of the 4 questions was, why is Mars red? Why are rocks on Earth red? And then looking at them or asking them to categorize these meso, macro, and micro scale sections of rock and what they can be used or how they can be used. And then the questions for during the experience, not only were the questions embedded in the lesson, but I used some of the questions from I forgot what Jessica called it, not the worksheet, the worksheet.
The recording sheet.
The recording sheet. And I adapted some of those questions because I felt like they were a little bit too open-ended for my kids to really get without me being right there. I made a short video on how to actually get into the virtual field trip and complete it and all the materials that they would need. And then of course they got the email from Smart Sparrow and I gave them 4 days to complete it, which if I go back and I look, I just want to point out it was due the 24th and they all did it the 23rd. They were assigned it Tuesday. I'd like to thank that one kid for doing it on the first day that I assigned it. Like, he will always have extra credit in my heart. So the biggest problem that these kids had was they get the email from Smart Sparrow and then they'd say, I don't have a password. And the number of times I had to email kids back and say, hit the forgot password link. I could probably like, that was the biggest problem that they had was they said, I don't know what to do. Well, hit the forgot password. And that solved 100% of their problems. I've been spending a good 2 afternoons going through their questions, and I actually have this big spreadsheet of their before and after questions. And it seems that this year they are starting to understand the connection that the oxidation that has occurred on Mars is not exactly the same as it has occurred on or the way the rocks have formed with the oxidation is not exactly the same on Mars as it is on Earth. That initially seems to be what I'm getting. And one of the other things that I think is interesting is their answers to why is Mars red before and after. I am seeing that they are in the after segment understanding that it's the fine layer of dust rather than embedded within the rock. But one of the things that I also think is interesting that I'm seeing is they're having a hard time with the microscale and understanding why we can't get microscale observations of the Mars rock. They went through the experience and they used the microscope tool to look at the rocks in Arizona and New Zealand, and then they're missing the connection that they didn't use a microscope to look at the rocks on Mars. And that seems to be like a 50-50 split where some of the kids seem to get it and some of them don't. And I'm not really sure why that is. And then the other thing that I've been looking at, and this is one of the things that I was actually working on this morning, is their questions before the experience versus after the experience. And these are the questions that I'm getting. So here's an example of just one student. His before questions was just about kind of superficial. And then the after questions are more in depth. And as we switch to next generation standards, one of the things that I'm interested in, and I work actually with my local BOCES on elementary science kits, and we're always trying to figure out different ways to get asking questions into our lesson plans for the elementary level. And I'm really interested in this, that they are asking more in-depth questions and more thought-provoking questions now than they were before the experience. So that's kind of a summary of what I have done with the experience this year and the past couple of years. And it is a lot of data that you will get, and that is something that I found to be, especially now, overwhelming. If I was in school, I don't think it would be as overwhelming because I have this like set life at school, and this year, right now, life is chaos, and it's just like, but you do get a lot of really great data to be able to look at. And I can tell one kid, I know that you copied your answers from somebody because you didn't even log in. So that's going to be kind of fun. So that's what I've got.
Don't leave the screen yet.
Okay.
Because I want to talk about this too, because I am so excited by this particular thing. And I think that we all as teachers who have tried to teach our kids how to write a research question and how many times we've bloodied our foreheads on trying to get kids to write good research questions. And you didn't even have to teach it here. Like they just naturally went from those overarching why questions down to at the end of the experience, like I could measure those two things. I could design an experiment around those two questions. That's incredible.
Yeah, I was looking at those questions and I was thinking to myself, is there a way to categorize all of these questions and really evaluate the types of questions for before and after? So if you want to do that sometime, I'm game for it. If there's somebody that wants to really look at those, I was, some of the kids were snotty and said no, which is fine. That's their kids. But
Yeah.
some of these I was like, wow, you really you learned something and something was going on up there that was making you think deeper, and I liked it a lot.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think the one thing with this experience is we always, when we built this particular experience, we were really nervous about the ending of the experience and that we don't actually know why Mars is red. There's all sorts of hypotheses out there as to why that dust is specifically red. I mean, we know it's oxidation, but we don't know how that oxidation is occurring. I love the fact that this kid specifically is like, how did it do it without water?
Yeah,
So
I had
yeah, and we had talked about putting in some stuff about the photoelectric way of creating oxidation, and it's like, man, that's too complicated. Long story short, it feels a little bit like a bait and switch at the end of it, but honestly, it's just good science that way, and that, that's literally the stuff that we're looking at on Mars currently. Like, we don't know the answers to those questions.